The sharp ache in my lower back had become my constant companion, a reminder that 18-hour shifts at Romano's weren't sustainable for much longer. I pressed my palm against the small of my spine as I bent to retrieve another stack of grimy plates from table 12. The ceramic edges slick with congealed marinara sauce that had the consistency of dried blood under the harsh fluorescent lights. The familiar weight of exhaustion settled deeper into my bones with each movement, but I couldn't afford to slow down. Not when Piper's school tuition was due next week, and our landlord Mr. Chen had already extended our grace period twice. The dinner rush at Romano's Italian Bistro was in full swing, transforming the usually elegant dining room into a battlefield of competing conversations, clinking silverware, and the perpetual hiss of the espresso machine. Steam rose from countless bowls of pasta, creating a humid fog that made my uniform cling uncomfortably to my skin. The scent of garlic and oregano, once comforting, now made my stomach churn with a queasiness I'd been experiencing more frequently lately. I attributed it to stress and too much caffeine, refusing to consider other possibilities I couldn't afford to entertain. Penelope, Table 7 needs their wine selection, and the VIP section just called down. They're expecting their party in 20 minutes. Marco, our floor manager, appeared at my elbow with his usual expression of barely controlled panic. His salt and pepper hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, a nervous habit that intensified whenever important clients were involved. Romano's reputation depended on flawless service, especially for the high-profile guests who could make or break the restaurant with a single review. I nodded, tucking a loose strand of auburn hair behind my ear and smoothing down my black apron. The VIP section occupied the restaurant's prime real estate, a secluded alcove with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's glittering financial district. Sound-dampening panels and strategic lighting created an atmosphere of intimate exclusivity, perfect for the kind of business discussions that required absolute privacy. I'd worked at Romano's for 8 months, long enough to recognize that certain clients commanded a level of deference that went beyond typical hospitality. The weight of my phone in my apron pocket felt heavier than usual as I made my way toward the wine cellar. Earlier that afternoon, I'd composed what felt like my 100th text to Marco, begging for an advance on my paycheck. The eviction notice taped to our apartment door that morning had given us 72 hours, and despite my pride screaming against it, I was out of options. Piper needed stability, needed to finish her senior year at the same school where she'd finally found her place, after years of upheaval following our parents' accident. My fingers found the phone as I descended the narrow stairs to the wine cellar, the temperature dropping noticeably in the underground space. Rows of bottles lined the walls like silent sentries, their labels bearing names I couldn't pronounce, and prices that made my monthly salary look pathetic. I pulled up my message to Marco, reading it one final time before hitting send. The words felt like swallowing broken glass, but desperation had a way of eroding dignity. Marco, I know this is incredibly unprofessional, but I need help. We received an eviction notice today, and I have nowhere else to turn. If you could advance me even half of next week's pay, I promise I'll work extra shifts to make up for it. Piper and I literally have nowhere to go. Please, I'm begging you. Penelope. I pressed send before I could lose my nerve, then immediately felt the familiar burn of shame in my cheeks. 23 years old, and reduced to pleading with my boss via text message. My parents would have been horrified. But then again, my parents never had to choose between rent and groceries, never had to explain to their teenage sister why the electricity got turned off again. The wine selection for Table 7 required a trip to the premium section, where bottles cost more than most people's cars. I located the requested vintage, a 1998 Barolo that would probably feed Piper and me for 2 months, and carefully cradled it as I climbed back to the main floor. The juxtaposition wasn't lost on me, serving liquid luxury to people who viewed money as an infinite resource while my own world crumbled over a few $1,000s. The VIP party has arrived, Marco informed me as I passed the host station, his voice carrying that particular tension reserved for Romano's most exclusive clientele. They specifically requested our most experienced server, That's you tonight, Penelope. Everything needs to be perfect. These guests have significant influence in the city. My stomach tightened with a mixture of nerves and opportunity. VIP tables meant higher tips, and higher tips might mean the difference between homelessness and hope. I straightened my shoulders and checked my reflection in the polished surface of a serving tray, ensuring my appearance met Romano's exacting standards. The dark circles under my green eyes were concealed with drugstore concealer, and my hair was pulled back in the elegant chignon required for fine dining service. The VIP alcove was partially concealed by decorative screens that created an intimate atmosphere while maintaining visual privacy. As I approached with the wine service cart, I could hear the low murmur of conversation, but couldn't yet see the guests clearly. The sound of expensive leather shoes against marble floors, the soft clink of crystal glasses, and an underlying current of authority that seemed to emanate from the secluded area. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Romano's," I began with my practiced smile as I rounded the corner, wine list in hand. "I'm Penelope, and I'll be taking care of you this evening. May I start you with our sommelier's recommendations for—" The words died in my throat as my gaze met the man seated at the head of the table. Time seemed to crystallize, every detail sharpening into brutal clarity. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved by Michelangelo himself, all sharp angles and classical beauty marred only by a thin scar that ran from his left temple to his jawline. But it was his eyes that stopped my world. Gray as storm clouds, intelligent and predatory, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle with recognition and something deeper, more dangerous. Preston Salvatore. Even his name was whispered in certain circles, attached to stories of power and influence that extended far beyond legitimate business. The man who owned half the waterfront, who had politicians and judges on speed dial, whose word could make problems disappear or create new ones depending on his mood. He was perhaps the most dangerous man in the city, and he was sitting in my section, staring at me with those calculating gray eyes. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket, probably Marco's response to my desperate plea. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was begging for help from my manager while standing 3 feet away from a man who could solve all my problems with the change in his couch cushions. But Preston Salvatore didn't help people like me. Men like him collected debts, not forgave them. "Ms. Reeves," he said, and the sound of my name in his deep voice sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. His 2 companions, men who looked like they could bench press small cars, shifted slightly in their chairs, but their boss never took his eyes off me. "How convenient to finally meet you in person." The wine list trembled in my hands before I forced them steady. How did he know my name? Romano's staff wore name tags, but that didn't explain the familiarity in his tone, as if we were continuing a conversation rather than meeting for the first time. "I'm sorry, sir, but I think there's been some confusion," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't believe we've met." His smile was slow and predatory, revealing perfect white teeth that somehow seemed more threatening than comforting. "Perhaps not in person, but we've certainly communicated recently. Your message was quite illuminating." My blood turned to ice in my veins. My phone felt like it was burning a hole through my apron as realization crashed over me like a tidal wave. In my desperation and exhaustion, I had sent my pleading text to the wrong contact. Somehow, instead of Marco's number, I had sent my most vulnerable, desperate moment to Preston Salvatore's private line. The dining room around us seemed to fade into background noise as the full implications hit me. This man now knew everything. My financial desperation, my sister's situation, our impending homelessness. Information was power in his world, and I had just handed him ammunition against me, gift-wrapped in my own desperation. "I think," he said, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who held all the cards, "we should have a private conversation after your shift ends. My driver will be waiting." It wasn't a request. Men like Preston Salvatore didn't make requests of people like me. They made statements, and we either complied or faced consequences I didn't want to imagine. The wine list fell from my nerveless fingers, fluttering to the marble floor like a wounded bird. The remaining 3 hours of my shift passed in a nightmarish blur of forced smiles and mechanical service. Every time I glanced toward the VIP section, Preston Salvatore was there, conducting his business with the calm efficiency of a man accustomed to absolute control. His presence dominated the space like a magnetic field, bending everything in the restaurant toward his will. Even Marco, usually unflappable under pressure, kept glancing nervously in that direction while wringing his hands. I tried to focus on my other tables, but my mind kept circling back to that moment of recognition, the way his gray eyes had assessed me like I was a chess piece he was considering moving. The text message I'd sent in desperation now felt like a confession written in blood. He knew about Piper, about our eviction, about how close we were to losing everything. In the wrong hands, that kind of vulnerability could be weaponized. My phone had buzzed twice more during the evening, but I was afraid to check it. The first buzz had come shortly after my encounter with Preston, followed by another an hour later. Each vibration against my hip felt like a countdown timer ticking toward some inevitable confrontation I wasn't prepared for. Penelope, Table 9 needs their check. Sarah, one of the other servers, brushed past me carrying a tray of pristine dessert plates. She paused, studying my face with concern. You look like you've seen a ghost. Everything okay? I forced a smile that felt more like a grimace. Just tired. Long day. She nodded sympathetically, but I caught her glancing toward the VIP section where Preston's party was finally beginning to wind down. Word traveled fast in a place like Romano's, and by now everyone knew we were hosting someone important. What they didn't know was that my entire world had shifted on its axis in the span of a single conversation. As closing time approached, the restaurant gradually emptied until only a handful of tables remained. The VIP section had gone quiet an hour ago, but when I finally worked up the courage to look, Preston was still there, alone now except for one of his companions. The other man stood by the windows like a statue, hands clasped behind his back, scanning the street below with professional alertness. Marco appeared at my elbow as I finished clearing my last table. Penelope, Mr. Salvatore has requested that you join him before you leave tonight. He's settled his bill, but wants to speak with you privately. My hands trembled as I untied my apron. Marco, This isn't negotiable, he interrupted, but his voice was gentle, almost sympathetic. I don't know what kind of business you have with him, but people don't say no to Preston Salvatore. Just be careful, okay? The walk to the VIP section felt like a condemned prisoner's final steps. My legs were unsteady, whether from exhaustion or terror, I couldn't tell. Preston had moved to the chair facing the entrance, positioned so he could see anyone approaching. The calculated placement wasn't lost on me. Everything about this man seemed deliberate, from his positioning to his timing. Sit, he said simply, gesturing to the chair across from him. The single word carried the weight of absolute authority, and I found myself obeying before my conscious mind could protest. Up close, he was even more formidable than I'd initially realized. His charcoal suit was clearly custom-tailored, the kind of garment that cost more than most people's annual salary. A platinum watch caught the light as he moved, and his manicured hands bore a single signet ring that probably had more history than most museums. But it was his presence that truly intimidated, the way he occupied space like he owned it, the careful stillness that suggested coiled violence beneath the civilized exterior. Your message was quite desperate, he began, his voice conversational despite the circumstances. 72 hours to find several $1,000s, caring for a teenage sister, no family support system. It paints a rather detailed picture of your situation. I forced myself to meet his gaze, though every instinct screamed at me to look away. I apologize for the confusion. That message wasn't intended for you. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Oh, I'm well aware of that, Miss Reeves. The question is, what do we do about it now? I don't understand. You've inadvertently brought yourself to my attention, he explained, leaning forward slightly. In my experience, that happens for a reason. Your landlord, for instance, Chen Property Management. Are you familiar with their other holdings? The change of subject caught me off guard. No, not really. They just collect our rent. Chen launders money for the Marchetti family, he said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. Your building, along with several others, serves as a front for their operations. The recent eviction notices aren't random. They're clearing properties for new purposes. The room seemed to tilt around me. That's impossible. Mr. Chen is just a businessman. He owns apartment buildings. Preston's companion moved closer to the table, placing a manila folder in front of me. Inside were photographs, financial documents, surveillance reports that painted a picture of criminal enterprise I couldn't fully comprehend. My building, my home, the place where Piper and I had tried to build some semblance of normal life, was apparently a key piece in some larger criminal puzzle. The Marchetti family has been expanding their operations, Preston continued, his tone remaining conversational despite the explosive nature of his revelations. Your eviction isn't about late rent, Miss Reeves. It's about clearing assets before a territorial expansion. You and your sister are simply collateral damage. I stared at the documents, my hands shaking as I tried to process what he was telling me. But we've paid our rent. We've never been involved in anything illegal. Innocence is irrelevant in situations like this, he said, his gray eyes studying my reaction with clinical interest. The Marchetti family doesn't distinguish between willing participants and unfortunate bystanders. When they move on a property, everyone goes. Why are you telling me this? The question escaped before I could stop it, driven by a desperate need to understand why Preston Salvatore would involve himself in the problems of a waitress and her teenage sister. His expression shifted, revealing something that might have been amusement. Because your accidental message has created an opportunity. The Marchetti family has been a persistent annoyance, and your situation provides an interesting avenue for addressing that problem. I don't understand. You don't need to understand, he replied, his voice hardening slightly. You need to make a choice. You can go home tonight, pack whatever belongings you can carry, and disappear before the Marchetti family decides you know too much. Or you can accept my protection. The word protection hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. I knew enough about men like Preston Salvatore to understand that protection came with strings attached, obligations that could bind someone forever. What kind of protection? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The kind that ensures you and your sister never have to worry about money, housing, or safety again, he said simply. In exchange for certain considerations. What considerations? His smile returned, predatory and knowing. We'll discuss the details once you've made your decision. But understand this, Miss Reeves. The offer has an expiration date. The Marchetti family moves fast when they decide to clean house. I thought about Piper, probably home right now working on her college applications, dreaming of a future that suddenly seemed impossibly fragile. She was 17, brilliant, and deserved every opportunity I'd never had. The idea of her becoming collateral damage in someone else's war made my stomach clench with protective fury. How do I know you're telling the truth? I asked. How do I know this isn't just some elaborate manipulation? Preston's companion stepped forward and placed a second folder on the table. This one contained recent surveillance photos of our apartment building, including images of men I didn't recognize watching the entrance, noting the comings and goings of residents. In one particularly clear photograph, I could see myself leaving for work that morning, completely unaware that I was being observed. The Marchetti family has been watching your building for 2 weeks, Preston explained. They're documenting everyone who lives there, identifying potential problems before they make their move. You and your sister are already on their radar. My blood turned to ice as I stared at the photographs. In one image, Piper was clearly visible walking home from school, her backpack slung over her shoulder and earbuds in her ears, completely oblivious to the danger surrounding her. "Time's running short, Miss Reeves," Preston said, checking his expensive watch. "My driver is waiting outside. You can come with me now and we'll collect your sister on the way to somewhere safe. Or you can go home and hope the Marchetti family decides you're not worth the trouble." The choice, when presented so starkly, wasn't really a choice at all. I looked once more at the photographs of Piper, my baby sister who had already lost so much, and knew I would do anything to protect her. "If I come with you," I said slowly, "what happens to us?" "You become my responsibility," he replied, the weight of ownership clear in his voice. "And I take very good care of what belongs to me." The possessive language should have terrified me, but instead, it triggered a strange sense of relief. For 3 years since our parents died, I'd carried the burden of keeping us afloat alone. The idea of someone else taking that responsibility, even someone as dangerous as Preston Salvatore, was seductive in its simplicity. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. "We'll need our things." "Already arranged," he said, rising from his chair with fluid grace. "My people have been monitoring your building. They'll collect whatever you need and bring it to your new accommodations." The efficiency with which he'd planned for my capitulation was both impressive and terrifying. How long had he been orchestrating this moment? How much of what felt like choice was actually inevitability? As we walked toward the restaurant's exit, Preston's hand found the small of my back, a gesture that appeared protective, but felt possessive. The warmth of his palm through my uniform sent an unwelcome shiver down my spine, a reminder that whatever arrangement we were entering would be far more complex than simple protection. His driver was indeed waiting, along with a second car that I suspected contained more of his security detail. The black sedans looked ordinary enough, but the men standing beside them radiated the same careful alertness as Preston's companion inside. "After you, Miss Reeves," Preston said, holding the car door open. "Your new life begins now." As I slipped into the leather interior, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the tinted windows. The young woman staring back at me looked older somehow, marked by the weight of choices made under duress. In the span of a single evening, I'd gone from struggling waitress to protected asset of one of the city's most dangerous men. The car pulled away from Romano's, and I watched the restaurant disappear behind us, along with the last remnants of my old life. The penthouse apartment existed in a different stratosphere from anything I'd ever experienced. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city below, where millions of lights twinkled like earthbound stars. The space itself was a study in understated luxury, leather furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars, artwork that belonged in museums, and a kitchen equipped with appliances I couldn't even identify. Everything was designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Piper sat curled in an oversized armchair, her laptop balanced on her knees as she worked on college applications with determined focus. She'd adapted to our sudden relocation with the resilience that had carried her through our parents' death and the unstable years that followed. When Preston's men had appeared at our apartment with instructions to pack, she'd simply asked if this meant she could finally get the art supplies she'd been wanting. Her acceptance of the situation was both blessing and burden. It made the transition easier, but also highlighted how desperate our circumstances had become. "The Northwestern application is almost finished," she said, without looking up from her screen. "Their essay prompt about overcoming adversity is pretty much writing itself at this point." I managed a weak smile from my position on the couch, where I'd been pretending to read a magazine while actually cataloging every exit and analyzing our new prison. Because that's what this was, regardless of the Egyptian cotton sheets and imported marble countertops. Golden cages were still cages. "That's great, sweetheart. Just remember the deadline is next week." "Already marked on my calendar," she replied, then glanced up with the sharp intelligence that had always made her seem older than her 17 years. Penelope, are you going to tell me what's really going on here? Before I could formulate an answer that wouldn't terrify her, the apartment's front door opened with the soft whisper of expensive engineering. Preston entered with his usual confident stride, followed by the ever-present companion I'd learned was named Marcus. They moved through the space like they belonged there, which of course they did. This was Preston's domain, and we were merely temporary occupants. "How are you settling in?" Preston asked, his gray eyes conducting their usual assessment of everything in the room. He'd changed from his business suit into more casual attire, dark slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal surprisingly muscular forearms. The less formal clothing didn't make him any less dangerous. If anything, it made him more so by revealing the physical power beneath the civilized exterior. "Everything's beautiful," I replied carefully, aware that Piper was listening to every word. "We appreciate your hospitality." His mouth curved in what might have been amusement. "Hospitality? Is that what we're calling it?" The dangerous undertone in his voice made my pulse quicken, but I forced myself to maintain eye contact. Over the past 24 hours, I'd learned that showing weakness only encouraged him to push harder against whatever boundaries I tried to establish. "Piper, why don't you work on your applications in your room?" I suggested, needing privacy for whatever conversation was about to unfold. "The light is better in there." My sister glanced between Preston and me with the perceptive awareness of someone who'd learned early to read dangerous situations. She closed her laptop with deliberate care and stood, but instead of heading toward her assigned bedroom, she faced Preston directly. "Are you going to hurt my sister?" she asked, with the blunt honesty that only teenagers could manage. Preston's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features before settling into something that might have been respect. "No," he said simply. "Your sister is under my protection. That extends to you as well." Piper studied him for a long moment, then nodded once and disappeared down the hallway. Her footsteps faded, followed by the soft click of a closing door, leaving us alone in the vast living space. "She's perceptive," Preston observed, moving to the bar area and pouring himself a measure of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "Reminds me of myself at that age." "Don't," I said sharply, rising from the couch. "Don't you dare compare yourself to her. She's nothing like you." His laugh was low and genuinely amused. "You think you know me, Miss Reeves? I know enough. You're a criminal who uses violence to solve problems and views people as possessions to be acquired." "Accurate as far as it goes," he agreed, taking a sip of his drink. "But incomplete. Would you like to know the rest of the story?" Despite every instinct screaming at me to maintain distance, I found myself curious about the man who held our lives in his hands. "What story?" "The one that explains how a scholarship kid from South Boston became Preston Salvatore." He moved to the windows, gazing out at the city lights with an expression I couldn't read. "My real name is Paul Sinclair. I was 15 when my mother was murdered by loan sharks because she'd borrowed money to pay for my sister's cancer treatments." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Whatever I'd expected him to say, it wasn't this raw confession of loss and transformation. "The police called it a home invasion," he continued, his voice maintaining that same conversational tone despite the weight of his words. "The insurance company found reasons to deny coverage. The hospital demanded immediate payment for treatments that had already failed. Within 6 months, I'd lost everything that mattered." I remained silent, sensing that interruption would shatter whatever fragile moment of honesty was unfolding. "Salvatore took me in," Preston said, turning back toward me. "Don Salvatore saw potential in an angry kid with nothing left to lose. He gave me a new name, a new identity, and the tools to ensure I'd never be powerless again." "So, you became a monster to avoid being a victim," I said quietly. "I became strong enough to protect what I value," he corrected. The question is, what do you value, Miss Reeves? My sister's safety. Her future. Good. We have common ground. He moved closer, and I fought the urge to retreat. Preston Salvatore wasn't a man who responded well to displays of weakness, and maintaining some semblance of dignity had become crucial to whatever negotiation was taking place. What do you want from us? I asked directly. From Piper? Nothing except that she continue being the remarkable young woman she clearly is. From you? His gray eyes held mine with unsettling intensity. That's more complicated. Explain. The Marchetti situation requires careful handling. Simply eliminating them would create a power vacuum that other families would rush to fill. Better to dismantle their operation systematically, and that requires someone they won't suspect. Understanding dawned like ice water in my veins. You want me to spy on them. I want you to return to your old life long enough to gather intelligence about their operations. Your building manager, Chen, reports directly to Marchetti lieutenants. A desperate woman pleading for more time to pay rent might learn useful information. And if they discover what I'm doing? His expression hardened. They won't. Because you'll be very good at being exactly what you appear to be, a frightened woman trying to protect her sister. The cold calculation behind his plan was breathtaking. He'd identified my greatest vulnerability and found a way to weaponize it for his own purposes. Yet beneath the manipulation, I sensed something else. A genuine desire to protect us from the very danger he was asking me to infiltrate. How long? I asked. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Long enough to map their financial operations and identify key players. And afterward? Afterward, you and Piper disappear into new identities with enough money to ensure you never have to work another day if you choose not to. The offer was seductive in its completeness. Financial security, safety, a future where Piper could attend any university she wanted without worrying about scholarships or debt. All I had to do was risk everything by pretending to be desperate enough to cooperate with money launderers. There's something else, Preston said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. Something we haven't discussed. What? Instead of answering immediately, he closed the distance between us until I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and masculine that made my treacherous body respond despite the circumstances. When he reached out to touch my face, I should have pulled away. Instead, I found myself frozen as his thumb traced the line of my cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. This, he said simply. The way you respond to me despite every logical reason to run. My breath caught as his words hit uncomfortably close to truth I wasn't ready to acknowledge. There was something magnetic about Preston Salvatore, something that transcended fear and common sense to create an attraction I couldn't explain or control. I don't know what you mean, I lied. His smile was knowing. You're attracted to danger, Miss Reeves. Specifically, you're attracted to me. The question is what we do about it. Nothing, I said firmly, even as my pulse raced beneath his touch. We do nothing about it. This is business. Is it? His other hand came up to frame my face, holding me gently but implacably in place. Because it feels like something else entirely. For a moment, the space between us seemed charged with possibility. I could see my reflection in his gray eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath against my lips. Every rational thought urged me to pull away, but some deeper instinct kept me frozen in place. The spell was broken by the soft sound of a door opening down the hallway. Preston stepped back immediately, his professional demeanor sliding back into place like armor as Piper emerged from her room. Sorry to interrupt, she said, though her knowing expression suggested she'd timed her appearance deliberately. I just wanted to get some water. Of course, Preston replied smoothly. The kitchen is fully stocked. Help yourself to anything you need. As Piper moved past us toward the kitchen, she caught my eye and raised one eyebrow in a silent question. I shook my head slightly, warning her against whatever teenage observation was forming in that sharp mind of hers. "I should let you both get some rest," Preston said, checking his watch. "Tomorrow we'll discuss the specifics of your return to the old neighborhood." He moved toward the door with his usual confident stride, but paused before leaving. "Miss Reeves, the offer stands regardless of your decision about the intelligence gathering. You and Piper are under my protection now. That doesn't change." After he left, the apartment felt larger and somehow emptier. Piper emerged from the kitchen with a glass of water and settled onto the couch beside me. "He's in love with you," she announced with characteristic directness. "Don't be ridiculous. Men like him don't fall in love. And men like him don't usually rescue waitresses and their sisters either," she pointed out. "But here we are." I stared out at the city lights, trying to process the events of the past day. Somewhere out there, the Marchetti family was planning whatever operation required clearing our old building. Preston was orchestrating a response that would put me directly in harm's way. And beneath it all, a dangerous attraction was growing between us that threatened to complicate everything. "Pen?" Piper's voice was softer now, tinged with the vulnerability she rarely showed. "Are we going to be okay?" I pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Yes," I promised, hoping it was true. "We're going to be okay." But as I held my sister in that expensive apartment high above the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that okay was a relative term, and that whatever came next would test every assumption I'd ever made about right and wrong, safety and danger, and the thin line between protection and possession. The return to our old neighborhood felt like stepping through a portal into a previous life. The familiar sounds of traffic, the scent of exhaust mingled with food from the corner bodega, the constant background hum of urban survival. Everything exactly as we'd left it, yet somehow transformed by knowledge I couldn't unknow. The building still looked shabby and worn, but now I saw it through different eyes, recognizing signs of surveillance I'd been blind to before. Marcus had driven me back in an unmarked sedan, dropping me off 3 blocks away to maintain the illusion that I'd never left. The story we'd crafted was simple enough. A sick relative upstate, a family emergency that explained my sudden absence from work in the neighborhood. Preston's people had even created fake medical records and hospital admission papers. The kind of detailed deception that spoke to resources I was only beginning to understand. "Remember," Marcus had said before I got out of the car, "you're desperate, not suspicious. Chen will expect you to beg, maybe cry a little. Give him what he expects." Now, standing in front of the building that had been my home for 3 years, I took a deep breath and prepared to play the most important role of my life. Everything depended on convincing Chen that I was exactly what I appeared to be, a frightened woman with nowhere else to turn. The lobby still smelled of industrial disinfectant and decades of accumulated cooking odors. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2B was checking her mail, her gray hair pinned back in the same style she'd worn for the 10 years I'd known her. She looked up as I entered, surprise flickering across her weathered features. "Penelope." "Mija, where have you been? That boy was here looking for you, asking all kinds of questions." My blood chilled. "What boy?" "Young guy, maybe 25, very polite but his eyes." She shuddered dramatically. "Cold, you know, like a shark. He wanted to know about you and Piper, how long you'd lived here, whether you had family visiting." The description could have fit any number of people, but given the circumstances, I suspected it was one of the Marchetti soldiers Preston had warned me about. The fact that they were asking questions about Piper made my stomach clench with protective fury. "Did you tell him anything?" I tried to keep my voice casual, neighborly gossip rather than life or death intelligence gathering. What was I going to tell him? "You work at that fancy restaurant. You keep to yourselves. You're good tenants who never cause trouble." Mrs. Rodriguez lowered her voice conspiratorially. "But I didn't like the questions, Mija. You be careful, okay? I promise to be careful." and climbed the stairs to Chen's office on the second floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. The hallway felt narrower than I remembered, shadows deeper and more threatening. Preston's revelations had stripped away the illusion of safety this place had once provided, revealing the criminal infrastructure that operated beneath its mundane surface. Chen's door was open, revealing a cramped office that served as the building's unofficial nerve center. Kevin Chen sat behind a desk that had seen better decades, his thin frame hunched over a ledger book as he made entries with the methodical precision of someone who understood that numbers told stories. He looked up as I knocked, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to something harder when he recognized me. "Miss Reeves, back from your family emergency, I see." "Yes, sir. I'm sorry about the sudden departure. My aunt in Albany had a stroke and—" "I don't need the details," he interrupted, setting down his pen with deliberate care. "What I need is the back rent you owe, plus late fees." I clutched my purse closer, feeling the weight of the carefully counted bills Preston's people had provided. The money was real, but not nearly enough to cover what Chen was demanding. The deficit was calculated to force exactly the kind of conversation Preston needed me to have. "I have some of it," I said, letting desperation creep into my voice. $800. I know it's not everything, but if you could just give me another week." "Another week?" Chen laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Miss Reeves, you're already 2 weeks behind. My patience has limits. Please, Mr. Chen, Piper's in her senior year, and if we have to move again—" I let my voice break slightly, drawing on very real memories of uncertainty and fear. "I'll have the rest by Friday, I promise." Chen studied me with eyes that seemed older than his 50-something years. There was calculation in his gaze, weighing options I couldn't see but suspected involved more than simple rent collection. "Sit down," he said finally, gesturing to the plastic chair across from his desk. "Let's discuss your options." I sat, clasping my hands in my lap to hide their trembling. Whatever came next would determine whether Preston's plan worked or whether I'd just signed Piper's and my death warrant. "Your building is changing hands," Chen said without preamble. "New ownership, new priorities. The current tenants will need to make some adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" "The kind that require discretion and cooperation," he replied carefully. "You've been a model tenant, Miss Reeves. Quiet, reliable, no problems with neighbors or authorities. That kind of stability is valuable." The words sounded innocuous, but something in Chen's tone made my skin crawl. I was being evaluated for some purpose beyond simple tenancy, and the criteria had nothing to do with my ability to pay rent on time. "I don't understand what you mean," I said, though I was beginning to suspect I understood perfectly. Chen opened a drawer and pulled out a manila folder, the same kind Preston had shown me, but containing different photographs. These images showed the building's basement, specifically areas I'd never seen during my 3 years of residence. Storage rooms that had been converted into offices, complete with filing cabinets and computer equipment. People in expensive suits conducting meetings in spaces that should have been empty. "The new ownership requires certain operational accommodations," Chen explained. "Tenants who can be counted on not to ask questions about unusual activity. People who understand that some business is best left unexamined." My mouth went dry as I stared at the photographs. This was it. The opening Preston had predicted. Chen was essentially offering me a choice between willful ignorance and forced eviction. But he was also revealing the scope of the operation hidden beneath our mundane apartment building. "What kind of unusual activity?" I asked, letting curiosity override apparent fear. "The kind that ensures rent-stable tenants never have to worry about increases or evictions," Chen replied smoothly. "Loyal tenants find their living situations very secure." The promise was seductive, and I could see how desperate people would accept it without looking too closely at the source of their good fortune. Safe housing in exchange for turning a blind eye to criminal activity operating in their own building. "And if someone couldn't be that kind of tenant?" I asked quietly. Chen's expression hardened. Relocation assistance is provided. Permanent relocation. The euphemism sent ice through my veins. People who couldn't be trusted simply disappeared, probably ending up in whatever body of water was most convenient. The casual way Chen delivered the threat suggested this conversation had happened before with other tenants. "I see," I said, trying to project the right mixture of fear and calculation. "And the rent situation? Forgiven entirely for cooperative tenants, along with a modest monthly stipend for ongoing discretion. So they were willing to pay tenants to stay quiet about operations conducted in their own building. It was ingenious in its simplicity. Turn potential witnesses into complicit beneficiaries, making them partners in their own silence." "How much of a stipend?" I asked, hating how mercenary the question sounded, but knowing it was exactly what someone in my supposed position would ask. $500 monthly, paid in cash. No reporting requirements, no documentation. The amount was enough to transform my financial situation completely. Combined with forgiven rent, it would mean Piper and I could actually build savings, plan for her college expenses, maybe even take a vacation. Under different circumstances, it would have been impossibly tempting. "I need to think about it," I said finally. Chen nodded as if he'd expected this response. "Of course. Take your time. But understand that the offer expires Friday. After that, alternative arrangements will be necessary." I stood up carefully, aware that every movement was being evaluated for signs of deception or resistance. "Thank you for being so understanding about the rent situation. Business is business, Miss Reeves, but relationships matter too." As I walked toward the door, Chen spoke again. "One more thing. Your sister, she's applying to colleges, isn't she?" I turned slowly, every maternal instinct screaming danger. "Yes." "Bright girl like that deserves every opportunity. It would be a shame if financial difficulties interfered with her education." The threat was delicately delivered but unmistakable. Cooperate, and Piper's future would be secured. Refuse, and both of us would face consequences that extended far beyond simple eviction. "I understand," I said quietly. "I'm sure you do. Until Friday, then." I climbed the stairs to our old apartment, my legs shaking with each step. The hallway that had once felt like home now felt like a trap, every shadow potentially concealing someone watching my movements. Our door stood exactly as we'd left it, but I knew Preston's people had been inside, staging the scene to support our cover story. The apartment felt hollow without Piper's presence, her absence a reminder of how much we both had at stake. I moved through the familiar space like a ghost haunting her own life, touching objects that belonged to a version of myself who hadn't known about criminal empires and protection rackets, and the price of safety in a world where innocence was a luxury few could afford. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "How did it go?" M. "Marcus, checking in on Preston's behalf." I typed back quickly. "As expected. They want an answer by Friday." The response came immediately. "Good. Maintain contact but don't seem eager. We need more details about their timeline." I set the phone aside and sank onto our old couch, the sagging cushions a far cry from the luxury I'd grown accustomed to over the past few days. The contrast was jarring. This shabby apartment that had been the best we could afford, versus Preston's penthouse where money was no object. The difference wasn't just financial. It was the gap between vulnerability and power, between being at the mercy of circumstances and controlling them. A soft knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. Through the peephole, I could see Mrs. Rodriguez holding a covered dish, her expression concerned. "I brought you some arroz con pollo," and she said, when I opened the door. "You look too thin, mija. Like you haven't been eating." The kindness in her voice almost broke my carefully maintained composure. Here was genuine care from someone who had no hidden agenda, no ulterior motive beyond neighborly concern. It made the deception I was perpetrating feel even more poisonous. "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez," That's very thoughtful. Where's Piper? Still upstate? I nodded, hating the lie but knowing it was necessary. She's staying with our aunt while I sort things out here. Good. This neighborhood, it's changing, not safe like it used to be. She lowered her voice. Strange men asking questions, people watching the building. You be very careful, okay? After she left, I sat at our small kitchen table eating the homemade meal and thinking about the impossible choices that had brought me to this point. In trying to protect Piper and secure our future, I'd become entangled with forces that could destroy everything I'd worked to build. Yet walking away wasn't an option, not when the alternative was trusting our safety to luck and hoping the Marchetti family would overlook 2 witnesses to their operations. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Preston himself. How are you holding up? His voice was surprisingly gentle, lacking the edge of command that usually characterized our interactions. I'm fine, I lied. No, you're not. You're sitting in that apartment thinking about how quickly your life has become unrecognizable. The accuracy of his observation was unsettling. Are you having me watched? I'm having you protected, he corrected. There's a difference. Is there? A pause, during which I could hear the sound of city traffic in the background. Yes, protection means I care what happens to you. The admission hung between us, weighted with implications I wasn't ready to examine. Whatever was developing between Preston and me went beyond simple business arrangement, beyond even the calculated manipulation I'd initially suspected. The offer's on the table until Friday, I said, changing the subject to safer ground. 500 monthly plus forgiven rent in exchange for silence about basement operations. Generous. They must be moving significant money through there. Chen showed me photographs, filing cabinets, computer equipment, meetings in what should be storage space. Good. That confirms our intelligence about their expansion into the building. What's your sense of the timeline? I thought about Chen's demeanor, the carefully planned pressure of his presentation. Soon. He was too confident, too prepared. This isn't a new operation they're building. It's one they're ready to fully activate. Which means Friday isn't really a deadline for your decision. It's a deadline for eliminating loose ends. The implications of his words settled over me like a shroud. Whether I accepted or refused Chen's offer, Friday would likely mark the end of my usefulness to the Marchetti operation. People who knew too much didn't get to simply walk away. Then we need to move quickly, I said. We will. But Penelope? The use of my first name sent an unexpected warmth through me. Whatever happens, you and Piper are safe. I give you my word. After he hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of our old apartment, surrounded by the remnants of a life that already felt like it belonged to someone else. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm of ambition and desperation. Millions of people pursuing their own versions of happiness and security. By Friday, I would know whether Preston's protection was real or simply another beautiful lie designed to secure my cooperation. Either way, there was no going back to the simple struggles of a waitress trying to keep her sister fed and housed. That woman had died the moment she accidentally sent a desperate text to the wrong number. Now I just had to survive long enough to become whoever came next. Thursday afternoon brought an unexpected complication in the form of Detective Rebecca Martinez, who appeared at my door with the kind of smile that suggested she knew more than she was saying. Middle-aged with steel gray hair and the observant eyes of someone who'd spent decades sorting truth from lies, she radiated the particular authority that came with a badge and 20 years of experience. Miss Reeves, I'm Detective Martinez with the Financial Crimes Unit. I was hoping we could have a conversation about your building management company. My blood turned to ice, but I managed to maintain what I hoped was appropriate confusion. I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Is there some kind of problem? May I come in? It's better if we discuss this privately. I had no choice but to step aside and let her enter. She moved through our small apartment with the careful attention of someone cataloging details. her gaze lingering on family photographs and the college brochures scattered across Piper's desk. Chen Property Management has come to our attention in connection with some unusual financial activity, she began, settling onto our couch without waiting for an invitation. We're interviewing tenants to better understand the company's operations. The timing couldn't have been worse. Tomorrow was my deadline with Chen, and Preston's plan depended on my appearing to be nothing more than a desperate tenant grateful for any accommodation. A police investigation would complicate everything, potentially exposing me as something other than what I claimed to be. I just pay my rent, I said carefully. I don't know anything about their business operations. Of course not. But sometimes tenants notice things. Unusual activity in common areas, people coming and going at odd hours, that sort of thing. Her tone was conversational, but I could feel the trap being constructed with each seemingly innocent question. Detective Martinez wasn't here on a fishing expedition. She had specific information and was testing my responses against known facts. I work evenings at Romano's restaurant, I replied. I'm usually not here during business hours. Romano's? That's the upscale Italian place downtown, isn't it? Must be interesting work, serving the city's elite. Something in her tone suggested this wasn't a casual observation. Did she know about Preston? About our connection? The possibility that my cover was already blown sent panic clawing at my throat. It pays the bills, I said neutrally. Detective Martinez pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of photographs. The same images Chen had revealed yesterday, but from different angles that suggested ongoing surveillance. Men in expensive suits conducting business in the building's basement, filing cabinets that clearly contained more than maintenance records, and computer equipment that belonged in a corporate office rather than apartment building storage. We've been monitoring your building for several weeks, she said, watching my reaction carefully. The level of activity in the basement areas is inconsistent with legitimate property management. I forced myself to look surprised, though my heart was hammering so hard I was sure she could hear it. I had no idea. I've never been down there except to do laundry. Money laundering operations often rely on unsuspecting cover, she continued. Legitimate businesses, residential buildings, normal-looking fronts that hide illegal activity. The people running these operations prefer tenants who don't ask questions. Are you saying my building is being used for money laundering? I'm saying we have concerns that warrant investigation. Have you noticed any unusual activity? People you don't recognize coming and going? Changes in building maintenance or management practices? Every question felt like a test I might fail without knowing the criteria. I thought about Chen's offer, about the photographs of basement operations, about Preston's warnings regarding the Marchetti family's expansion plans. There have been some people around lately, I admitted, deciding that acknowledging obvious surveillance was safer than claiming complete ignorance. Men I don't recognize, asking questions about tenants. It made some of us uncomfortable. Martinez leaned forward, her interest sharpening. What kind of questions? How long people had lived here, whether we had visitors, that sort of thing. Mrs. Rodriguez in 2B mentioned it to me. When did this start? Maybe 2 weeks ago? I've been away dealing with a family emergency, so I might have missed some of it. She made notes on her tablet, but I couldn't tell whether my answers were supporting or undermining whatever theory she was building. The conversation felt like walking through a minefield, where every step could trigger an explosion. Miss Reeves, I need to ask you directly. Has anyone from building management approached you about keeping quiet regarding unusual activity? Perhaps in exchange for reduced rent or other considerations? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. She knew. Somehow Detective Martinez knew about Chen's offer, which meant this interview wasn't about gathering information. It was about determining my level of involvement. No, I lied, knowing that any other answer would compromise Preston's operation and potentially expose Piper and me to retaliation from the Marchetti family. Nothing like that. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. and I knew she didn't believe me. That's interesting. We have reason to believe such offers have been made to several tenants. Maybe they approached other people. I've been dealing with my aunt's medical situation. Martinez studied me for a long moment, then stood up with the fluid motion of someone much younger than her years suggested. Miss Reeves, money laundering operations are serious business. The people involved don't hesitate to eliminate potential witnesses, especially when law enforcement gets close to their activities. Are you trying to scare me, detective? I'm trying to keep you alive, she replied bluntly. If you're involved in this, willingly or not, you need protection. The kind of protection we can provide in exchange for cooperation. Another offer of protection, another set of strings attached. I was beginning to understand why Preston had warned me about the complexities of my situation. Everyone wanted something, and everyone was willing to offer safety in exchange for betrayal of someone else. I appreciate your concern, but I really don't know anything that would help your investigation. She handed me a business card, her expression serious. That may change. When it does, call me immediately. Don't wait. Don't try to handle it yourself. Don't trust anyone else to protect you. The people you're dealing with have resources you can't imagine. After she left, I sat staring at her card and trying to process this new complication. A police investigation meant scrutiny that could expose Preston's operation before we'd gathered the intelligence he needed. It also meant Chen and his associates would be even more paranoid about potential informants among the building's tenants. My phone rang, Preston's number appearing on the screen. Detective Martinez just left, I said without preamble. I know. She's been conducting interviews throughout the building. How do you... Never mind. I don't want to know. Her investigation could work to our advantage, Preston continued. It provides cover for your questions and gives the Marchetti family a reason to accelerate their timeline. What if she's watching me? What if she knows about our connection? Then we adapt. But Penelope, you need to understand something. Martinez isn't just investigating money laundering, she's building a case against me. The admission hit like a physical blow. What? Financial crimes, racketeering, conspiracy. The usual charges when they can't prove the specific acts they suspect. Your building is just one piece of a larger investigation. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the complexity of forces swirling around me. So, cooperating with you could make me a target of the police, and cooperating with them could make me a target of the Marchetti family. Welcome to my world, he said with dark humor. Everyone wants something, and everyone's willing to trade your safety to get it. Except you? A pause that stretched long enough to make me wonder if he'd hung up. I'm trading other people's safety for yours. Don't mistake that for altruism. The honesty was brutal, but somehow reassuring. At least Preston didn't pretend his protection came without cost to someone else. What happens tomorrow when I have to give Chen an answer? You accept his offer. We need access to their operation, and that's the only way to get it without triggering a war. And then? Then you document everything you can while staying alive long enough for me to dismantle their organization. That's not much of a plan. It's the only plan that keeps you and Piper breathing, he replied. Unless you'd prefer to trust Detective Martinez to protect you from people who've been eliminating witnesses longer than she's been a cop. That evening, I returned to Preston's penthouse to find Piper curled up on the couch with a book, her laptop displaying what appeared to be a completed college application. She looked up as I entered, immediately reading the stress in my expression. Bad day at the office? She asked with the dry humor that had carried her through our parents' death and the unstable years that followed. Something like that. I settled beside her, grateful for the normalcy of her presence. How are the applications coming? Finished Northwestern, started on Columbia. Their essay prompts are actually pretty interesting. The casual mention of schools that cost more per year than I'd ever earned made my chest tighten with familiar anxiety. Even with Preston's protection, I couldn't shake the fear that somehow we'd lose everything and end up worse off than before. Pen? Piper's voice was softer now, tinged with the vulnerability she rarely let show. Are we going to be okay? Really okay? I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and marveling at how much she'd grown in the past year. 17 years old and already taller than me, with the kind of quiet intelligence that reminded me daily of everything our parents had hoped she'd become. Yes, I promised, meaning it despite the uncertainty surrounding us. Whatever happens, we're going to be okay. Even if we can't go back to our old life? The question revealed how much she'd understood about our situation, despite my attempts to shield her from the worst details. Piper had always been perceptive, but living through loss and instability had sharpened that awareness into something almost adult. Maybe our old life wasn't as good as we thought, I said carefully. Maybe this is a chance for something better. She was quiet for a moment, processing this. Do you trust him, Preston? The question I'd been avoiding answering even to myself. Did I trust a man who'd built an empire through violence and intimidation? Who viewed people as assets to be protected or eliminated based on their usefulness? Who'd inserted himself into our lives through a combination of calculated manipulation and genuine desire to help? I trust him to keep us safe, I said finally. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. Preston arrived an hour later, carrying takeout from an upscale Thai restaurant and wearing the kind of casual clothes that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. Dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the predatory grace with which he moved through space. How was school? He asked Piper, as he unpacked containers of food that smelled like heaven and probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. Productive. I finished my Northwestern application. Excellent. What are you planning to study? International relations with a focus on conflict resolution. Preston's smile was genuine, transforming his face from coldly handsome to simply beautiful. Noble aspirations. The world needs more people dedicated to solving problems through negotiation rather than force. The irony of this sentiment coming from a man who'd built his empire through exactly the opposite approach wasn't lost on any of us, but Piper simply nodded seriously. Someone has to try to make things better. After dinner, Piper retreated to her room to work on more applications, leaving Preston and me alone in the vast living space. He moved to the bar area and poured himself a measure of whiskey, offering me a glass of wine that I declined. Tomorrow, he said without preamble, you accept Chen's offer and begin documenting everything you observe. Meetings, participants, schedules, financial records if you can access them. And Detective Martinez? We'll continue her investigation regardless of what we do. The question is whether we can gather what we need before she either arrests the Marchetti lieutenants or forces them to abandon the building operation. I moved to the windows, gazing out at the city lights that stretched to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Chen was preparing for my answer tomorrow. Detective Martinez was building her case against both the Marchetti family and Preston himself. And Piper was dreaming of a future that depended on choices I'd made without fully understanding their consequences. What happens after we get what you need? I asked. The Marchetti operation gets dismantled, their people either eliminated or absorbed into my organization, and their territory becomes mine. And us? He moved behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body against my back. That depends on what you want. I want Piper to be safe. I want her to have the future she deserves. Done. What else? The question hung between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to examine. What did I want beyond my sister's safety? What kind of life could I build with a man whose world operated by rules I barely understood? I want to matter, I said quietly, surprised by my own honesty. I want to be more than just someone who needs protecting. His hand settled on my shoulders, and I could see our reflection in the window glass. Two figures silhouetted against the lights of the city, connected by circumstance and something deeper that neither of us had named. "You already matter," he said softly. "The question is whether you're willing to embrace what that means." Before I could respond, he stepped away, leaving me standing alone at the window with my own reflection and the weight of choices that would reshape everything I thought I knew about myself. Tomorrow I would return to my old life one last time, accept Chen's poisonous offer, and begin the most dangerous performance of my life. The frightened waitress, grateful for criminal protection, would gather intelligence for the man who'd claimed her and her sister as his own. And somewhere in the spaces between deception and truth, protection and possession, I was discovering that the woman I'd been was disappearing, replaced by someone harder and more complex, someone who might actually be worthy of Preston Salvatore's dangerous affection. Friday morning dawned gray and cold, matching the dread that had settled in my stomach like a lead weight. I stood outside our old building, staring up at windows that had once represented home, and now felt like the mouth of a trap I was willingly entering. Preston's team had equipped me with a small recording device disguised as a button on my coat, and the weight of it felt enormous despite its tiny size. Mrs. Rodriguez was sweeping the front steps when I arrived, her weathered face lighting up with genuine pleasure at seeing me again. "Mija, how is your aunt doing?" "Better, thank you. She's recovering slowly." The lie came easier now, polished by repetition until it felt almost true. "I'm hoping to bring Piper home soon." "Good, good. That girl belongs in school with her friends, not in some hospital." I climbed the stairs to Chen's office with careful steps, hyper-aware of every sound and shadow. The hallway seemed narrower today, more oppressive, as if the building itself knew what was about to unfold within its walls. Through thin walls, I could hear the normal sounds of people living their lives. Television programs, conversation, children playing, all oblivious to the criminal enterprise operating beneath their feet. Chen was waiting for me, his office door open and his expression neutral as I approached. He'd dressed more formally today, his usual casual shirt replaced by a button-down and tie that suggested this meeting carried special significance. "Miss Reeves, right on time." He gestured to the familiar plastic chair across from his desk. "I trust you've had time to consider our conversation." "I have." I settled into the chair, clasping my hands in my lap to hide their trembling. "The offer is very generous." "It is. And your decision?" "I accept. The rent forgiveness and monthly stipend in exchange for..." I paused, needing him to spell out exactly what was being asked of me for the recording device. "What did you call it? Discretion regarding operational activities?" Chen's smile was thin, but satisfied. "Exactly. You see nothing unusual, hear nothing concerning, and report nothing to outside parties. In exchange, your housing costs disappear, and you receive $500 monthly for your discretion." "And Piper? She's included in this arrangement?" "Of course. Your sister will be equally protected as long as the family maintains its commitment to discretion." The word family sent a chill through me. We weren't just being bought. We were being inducted into some form of criminal association that would tie us to their operations indefinitely. "When does this begin?" I asked. Chen opened a desk drawer and withdrew a thick envelope along with a document that resembled a lease agreement. "Today. This supersedes your previous rental agreement and establishes the new terms of your tenancy." I accepted the envelope, feeling the weight of cash inside. More money than I'd ever held at one time, and all it cost was my integrity and potentially my life if things went wrong. "There are some additional considerations," Chen continued, his tone becoming more serious. "Your previous rent payments have been forgiven, but there are other tenants who've been less accommodating regarding the building's evolution." What do you mean? Mrs. Patterson in 4A has been asking questions about basement activity. Mr. Kowalski in 3C contacted the city about noise complaints that could draw unwanted attention. Chen's expression hardened. These situations require resolution. Understanding dawned like ice water in my veins. What kind of resolution? Relocation assistance, as I mentioned previously. Some people are better suited to different living arrangements. The euphemism didn't disguise the reality. Tenants who couldn't be trusted to stay quiet would be eliminated, their disappearances explained as voluntary relocations to worried family members or police who might ask questions. I see, I managed, though my throat felt like sandpaper. The new operational schedule begins Monday. There will be increased activity in the basement areas, particularly during evening hours. Tenants who've agreed to our arrangement should plan to be elsewhere during these times. Shopping, visiting friends, working evening shifts, natural absences that don't require explanation. How will I know when to be away? Chen pulled out a prepaid cell phone and placed it on the desk. You'll receive text notifications. Simple messages about building maintenance that require tenant absence for safety reasons. I pocketed the phone, adding it to the recording device in my regular cell. The weight of technology felt like chains binding me to Preston's operation and Chen's criminal enterprise simultaneously. Are there other tenants who've accepted similar arrangements? I asked, needing to understand the scope of their recruitment. Several. Building community is important, Miss Reeves. Neighbors looking out for each other, maintaining appropriate privacy, ensuring everyone's safety and security. A community of reluctant accomplices, each family threatened into compliance, and then made complicit through financial benefits they couldn't afford to lose. It was brilliant in its psychological manipulation. What about the police? I asked. Detective Martinez was here yesterday asking questions. Chen's expression darkened. Detective Martinez is a persistent problem that's being addressed through appropriate channels. Her investigation will be redirected to more productive avenues. The casual way he dismissed a police investigation suggested resources and connections that went far beyond simple money laundering. Chen wasn't just a building manager coordinating criminal activity. He was part of a larger organization with enough power to manipulate law enforcement. I understand, I said, though understanding only made the situation more terrifying. Excellent. Welcome to the family, Miss Reeves. He stood and extended his hand, and I had no choice but to shake it, sealing my apparent acceptance of his poisonous offer. His palm was dry and cold, and his grip lingered just long enough to feel possessive. Oh, one final detail, he said as I moved toward the door. Your sister's college applications, Northwestern and Columbia, are excellent choices. Expensive, but excellent. My blood turned to ice. How do you know about her applications? Community awareness, Miss Reeves. We take care of our own, which includes ensuring bright young people have every opportunity to succeed. It would be a shame if financial difficulties or legal complications interfered with her education. The threat was delicately delivered but unmistakable. Step out of line, and Piper's future would be destroyed along with everything else we'd worked toward. I left Chen's office with my legs barely steady enough to carry me down the hallway. The envelope of cash felt like it was burning through my coat pocket, physical evidence of my new role as a paid accomplice to criminal enterprise. The weight of the recording device offered some comfort. At least Preston would have evidence of the Marchetti operation's scope and methods. The climb to our old apartment felt eternal, each step carrying me further from the woman I'd been and closer to someone I didn't recognize. The space felt different now, contaminated by knowledge I couldn't unknow, and choices I couldn't unmake. I was supposed to stay in the apartment for an hour, maintaining the appearance of a woman settling back into her normal routine. Instead, I spent the time cataloging everything I'd learned, memorizing details that might prove crucial to Preston's operation. Chen's confidence about redirecting Detective Martinez's investigation suggested corruption that reached high into the police department. The casual mention of other tenants being relocated indicated a systematic approach to eliminating witnesses, and the sophisticated coordination of basement operations pointed to resources far beyond what I'd initially understood. My phone buzzed with a text from Preston. How did it go? As expected. They're moving forward with full operations Monday. Good. Come home. Home. The word sent an unexpected warmth through me despite the circumstances. Preston's penthouse had become a refuge in ways I hadn't anticipated, and the promise of Piper's presence there felt like the only anchor in a world that had become unrecognizable. The ride back across the city felt like traveling between different universes. The shabby neighborhoods of my old life gave way to gleaming towers and manicured spaces where money could solve any problem and buy any protection. Preston's world was seductive in its simplicity. Clear lines of power and loyalty, where safety came through strength rather than luck. Piper was in the kitchen when I arrived, attempting to recreate one of our mother's recipes with ingredients that cost more than we used to spend on groceries in a month. She looked up as I entered, immediately reading the strain in my expression. "Rough day at the office?" she asked, echoing her question from the previous evening, something like that. I moved to help her with the cooking, needing the normalcy of shared domestic tasks. "How are the applications coming?" "Columbia wants an additional essay about overcoming adversity. I might have too much material to choose from at this point." Her dry humor made me smile despite everything. That's one way to look at it. Preston appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his business suit, but with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. He studied my face with those penetrating gray eyes, conducting his usual assessment of my emotional state. "Successful morning?" he asked. "They've accepted me into their community," I replied, investing the words with all the irony they deserved. "Good. We'll discuss the details later." He moved to pour himself coffee, and I noticed the careful way he avoided coming too close to me while Piper was present. Whatever was developing between us remained carefully contained when my sister was around. Another layer of protection he provided without being asked. "I'm going to take a shower," I announced, needing space to process the morning's events and remove the recording device before someone discovered it. The bathroom felt like a sanctuary, all marble and brass fixtures that spoke of wealth and security. I stripped off the coat and carefully removed the tiny recording device, its weight seeming enormous now that it contained evidence that could destroy lives or save them depending on how it was used. Under the scalding water, I tried to wash away the feeling of Chen's handshake and the weight of complicity that had settled over me like a shroud. But some stains went deeper than soap could reach, and I was beginning to understand that the woman who'd accidentally sent a desperate text message was gone forever. When I emerged from the bathroom, I found Preston waiting in the hallway, his expression serious. "The recording?" he asked quietly. I handed him the device, noting how his fingers brushed mine as he took it. Even that brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through me, a reminder of the attraction that complicated everything about our relationship. "Chen mentioned Detective Martinez," I said. He seemed confident about redirecting her investigation. Preston's jaw tightened. "Martinez has been getting close to several of my operations. The Marchetti family isn't the only organization she's targeting." "What does that mean for us?" "It means we're running out of time. Monday's operations will provide the evidence we need to dismantle their network, but we have to move before Martinez's investigation forces them underground." "And after Monday?" He studied my face for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth I could handle. "After Monday, you and Piper will be free to choose your own future. The threat will be eliminated, the Marchetti family will no longer exist, and Detective Martinez will have a different set of problems to occupy her attention. What about you? What about me? Where do you fit into our future?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications neither of us had been willing to address directly. Whatever had grown between us over the past weeks went beyond simple protection, beyond the calculated manipulation I'd initially suspected. "That depends," he said slowly, "on whether you can accept what I am and what I do." And if I can't? Then you and Piper disappear into new identities with enough money to build whatever life you choose. I keep my word, regardless of personal cost. The promise should have reassured me, but instead, it highlighted the impossible nature of our situation. How could I build a life with a man whose world operated by rules that violated everything I'd been taught about right and wrong? How could I walk away from someone who'd shown me a strength and security I'd never imagined possible? I need time to think, I said finally. Time is the one thing we don't have much of, he replied, but I'll give you what I can. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table like a normal family sharing a normal meal, I watched Preston interact with Piper and marveled at the complexity of the man who'd claimed us both. He listened to her college plans with genuine interest, offered insights about universities and career paths that revealed an education and sophistication that went beyond his criminal reputation. He was patient with her questions, protective without being overbearing, and clearly proud of her intelligence and ambitions. Northwestern has an excellent international relations program, he was saying. Though if you're serious about conflict resolution, you might consider adding some practical experience to your academic foundation. What kind of practical experience? Mediation training, perhaps an internship with the UN or State Department. Understanding theory is important, but seeing how power actually works is essential. The irony of a criminal kingpin giving career advice about legitimate conflict resolution wasn't lost on any of us, but Piper nodded seriously and made notes on her phone. After she went to bed, Preston and I found ourselves alone in the living room with the city lights spreading below us like scattered diamonds. He'd poured himself whiskey, and I'd accepted a glass of wine, though neither of us seemed particularly interested in drinking. "She's remarkable," he said, settling onto the couch beside me. "Intelligent, resilient, completely unintimidated by circumstances that would crush most adults. She's been through a lot. It either breaks you or makes you stronger." "Which did it do to you?" The question caught me off guard. "Both, I think. I'm stronger than I was, but some things are definitely broken." "Such as?" I thought about the woman I'd been before our parents died. Before I'd become responsible for keeping Piper and myself afloat in a world that didn't care whether we survived. That woman had believed in clear distinctions between right and wrong, had trusted that good people would be rewarded and bad people punished. Experience had taught me that morality was more complex, and survival required compromises that couldn't be judged by simple standards. My faith in justice, I suppose. My belief that doing the right thing matters more than doing the effective thing. Preston was quiet for a moment, studying the amber liquid in his glass. Justice is a luxury most people can't afford. Effectiveness is what keeps you alive. Is that how you justify what you do? "I don't justify anything," he replied. "I accept responsibility for my choices and their consequences. Some of those choices have been necessary, some have been profitable, and some have been both. And some have been wrong. Many have been wrong by conventional standards, but conventional morality assumes a level of safety and security that doesn't exist for everyone." I understood what he meant, even if I couldn't fully accept it. The woman who'd grown up in a stable middle-class home with parents who loved her had the privilege of believing in absolute moral standards. The woman who'd spent 3 years keeping herself and her sister fed and housed through whatever work she could find had learned that survival sometimes required flexible ethics. "What happens Monday?" I asked, changing the subject to something I could process more easily. "You go to work at Romano's as usual. The basement operations will begin around 8 p.m., giving us several hours to document their activities. By Tuesday morning, the Marchetti family will no longer be a threat to anyone." "And Detective Martinez?" "Will find herself investigating a case that no longer exists, with key witnesses who've disappeared and evidence that leads nowhere productive." The casual way he discussed manipulating a police investigation was both impressive and terrifying. Preston operated on a level where law enforcement was simply another variable to be managed, rather than an authority to be feared. "I should go to bed," I said, though I made no move to leave the couch. "Should you?" His voice had dropped to that intimate register that made my pulse quicken despite all the logical reasons to maintain distance. We were sitting close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the faint scar that ran along his jawline, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Preston," I began, though I wasn't sure what I intended to say. "I know," he said softly. "This is complicated. We're complicated." His hand found mine, fingers intertwining with a gentleness that contradicted everything I knew about what those hands had done. The contact sent electricity through me, a reminder of the attraction that had been building between us despite every reason to resist it. "After Monday," I said quietly, "when this is over and Piper is safe, and we have choices again, what then? Then you decide whether you can love a man who's done terrible things for what he believed were necessary reasons. And if I can." His smile was soft and vulnerable in a way I'd never seen from him before. "Then we build something together that's stronger than either of us could create alone." The promise hung between us, beautiful and impossible, and completely dependent on surviving the next few days. Whatever came after Monday would require reinventing ourselves and our relationship, finding a way to bridge the gap between his world and mine. For now, though, I let myself enjoy the simple pleasure of his hand in mine, and the view of the city spread below us like a constellation of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new dangers and difficult choices, but tonight we had this moment of peace before the storm. Monday would change everything. I could feel it approaching like a tide that would either lift us to safety or destroy everything we'd built together. Either way, there would be no going back to the woman I'd been, or the simple struggles of keeping my sister fed and housed. Preston Salvatore had claimed us both, and whatever happened next, we would face it as his family, protected, cherished, and irrevocably changed by the dangerous love that had grown from a single misdirected text message. The woman who'd sent that desperate plea for help was gone forever. What remained was someone harder, more complex, and perhaps finally strong enough to deserve the fierce protection of the most dangerous man in the city. Thumbnail description. Create a cinematic thumbnail that captures the heart-stopping moment of forbidden attraction in an upscale restaurant setting. The image should show a devastatingly handsome, powerful man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. This is Preston Salvatore, mid-30s with storm-gray eyes and dark hair swept back, exuding dangerous authority and barely restrained control. His physique should be imposingly athletic with broad shoulders that fill his custom suit perfectly, and his presence should command the entire frame with magnetic intensity. Across from him stands a beautiful but vulnerable young woman, Penelope, early 20s with auburn hair and striking green eyes that reveal both strength and desperation. She's wearing a simple black waitress uniform that contrasts sharply with the opulent surroundings, emphasizing the vast gulf between their worlds. Her posture should convey both defiance and attraction, showing a woman caught between fear and inexplicable draw to this dangerous man. The setting is Romano's Italian bistro, an exclusive VIP section with rich wood paneling, crystal chandeliers casting warm golden light, and floor-to-ceiling windows revealing glittering city lights beyond. The atmosphere should be intimate yet tense, with shadows playing across both figures to create dramatic lighting that emphasizes the forbidden nature of their connection. The moment captured should be their first direct confrontation, when she realizes she's accidentally sent her most desperate message to the city's most feared man. His expression should blend predatory satisfaction with genuine intrigue, while hers shows shock, transitioning to reluctant fascination. Both should appear to be circling each other like beautiful predators, the air between them crackling with unspoken tension and dangerous possibility. Include subtle details that hint at wealth and power: his platinum watch, the expensive wine glasses, the luxurious restaurant setting, while emphasizing the stark contrast with her working-class background. The overall color palette should be rich golds and deep shadows, creating an atmosphere of seductive danger and impossible attraction that immediately communicates. This is a story where a single wrong text message changes everything forever.